Okay, just tell me who you are and go.
Okay, this is Sylvester for the Vagabond film, Hollywood's next greatest hit. You know, you ready?
Yeah.
My little climbing career, or whatever you want to call it, actually my whole life, I guess you could say it all began with a small theft. I, I was my last year of college, and I found a brochure on another student's desk for this thing called ISM, International School of Mountaineering. Now they dropped one of the M's. I guess it's called International School of Mountaineering. It's a little pretentious. Or maybe they dropped the second M, and it's called, the real name is now International School of Modern, which is kind of groovy and avant-garde. I don't know, but boy, have I paid for this. But what was happening was I knew I was going to do a year of grad school in Stockholm. I was going to combine my two useless majors of sociology and Scandinavian literature and language. You know, people ask me why I skied off a cliff, and I say, when you have majors like that, what else can you do? What else does it leave you? But anyway, so I was going to be in school, and there was this climbing school, and I was going to maybe do that in the summer. So I took this thing, which I've sort of felt guilty about ever since, and boy, have I paid for it. You know, the suffering, the forced bivvies, I'm my share. So maybe I have paid for it over and over again. So anyway, you know, I got through the school year, and I'm reading about the Eiger Direct in the International Herald, and suddenly John Harlan falls to his death, you know, an infamous bit of, you know, climbing history. And I'm signed up to take a class 3 months later at ISM, the second year it was in existence. And I'm thinking, you know, he's the director of the school. Look what happened to him. What's going to happen to me, a mere student? Of course, I wouldn't be doing anything hard, you know, theoretically in the beginning. So anyway, my wife and I, first marriage, we left and started driving down to Switzerland and did the usual tourist things, you know. In Copenhagen, did the tour of the Turburg and the Carlsberg beer factories and free beer and cheese and mustard, and got to Amsterdam and went to the Rijksmuseum and saw the Anne Frank house. And then we arrived in the small town of Lausanne, which whenever you say it, people think you mean Lausanne. And, you know, I get to Lausanne, small village, all the hairpin, you know, switchbacking roads going up it, and I find a gendarme, and I ask him where the International School of Modern Mountaineering is, and I get nothing. I get a quizzical look, and he doesn't speak English, you know, like a lot of, you know, Swiss are bi-trilingual, but English wasn't one of his languages. And I got to tell you, I was pretty naive in those days. Harlan, who was quite a promoter, he had this really fancy letterhead, sort of an abstract mountainscape at the top. I probably have some of those, or one of them, but, you know, amidst the disorganization, I never find it. And I'm picturing, I mean, this is how dumb I was, or naive. I'm picturing a 3-story modern glass building, you know, steel supports. How could he not know? And I repeat it, you know, and I get nothing from the guy. And then I have this sinking feeling. And I've seen this picture before. I've come all the way down, driven 1,000 miles from Stockholm to Lausanne, and I'm not going to connect with the skull. And I have this letter. I had 3 letters from Harlan, which, to my regret, I never saved. And I have this letter written from Don Willens. And I'm scanning it, you know, and finally I find something, Club Vagabond. And, oh, suddenly the guy's eyebrows raise. Oh, Vagabond. Forget about ism. Again, double M's then. And he points up the road. So it turned out, you know, it was a notorious den of iniquity. And the climbing school, essentially down the basement near the discotheque, where all the girls got pregnant and had to go to the hospital. Abortions were legal in Switzerland, but the girls had to go before a hospital board and get permission. They were getting kind of, you know, I didn't notice at the time, but they were getting a little peeved with the Club Vagabond. The climbing school is essentially a little concrete bin with a couple of old ropes and a couple of mismatched climbing boots. Anyway, Willens and Hassan took over the skull after John's death. I thought that Willens would keep it, that he had priority. He was the one writing the letters. He was older than Dougal. But I had a pretty strange baptism into climbing. My first climbing partners, first rope climb I did in my life above, town, was with Don Willens. And my first four partners were Willens, Haston, Chenard, and Core. Chenard was a poor climber selling first of his innovations, his chromoly pitons, to subsidize his summer in the Alps. And later I hooked up with Core and went to the Dolomites. But aside from a couple of fellow students, those are my first four climbing partners. And this is Chenard way pre-Patagonia. So I think one of the turning points, this was an introduction to more than climbing. It was a way of life because I hadn't met people like this. All my classmates were from the same mold. These were Hemingway existential characters. They were bigger than life. They were legends without devaluing the language. And I think that first climb actually influenced me as much as anything. We did this 4-pitch chimney, Willens leading with I and another student, and the first pitch was a sloping ledge, and I wasn't a natural at exposure. It scared me. I was nervous. And then the climb became a chimney, and it cut so far back into the rock, I think it must have been the Tour d'Ailly, that it was more like splunking, potholing, caving. And it was wettish, because it always rains there, and mud had gone down. And I emerged from this caving experience, probably 30 feet, don't remember exactly, back from the face. And there's Dougal and Joy, who was his girlfriend then. And, it's sunny, the grass is green, she's in a bra, and I think he was humming Spider and the Fly, Rolling Stones, which was big then. In fact, the whole Vagabond, I think the climbers were like spiders and, the girls were like the flies. And I think that moment, something clicked. I was not a natural. Exposure scared me, but I said, wow, what's going on here? That was it. So all kinds of things happened. One day, my wife wanted to get on, my first wife, and her brother was a roommate of mine at Cal. He became a footnote in American history because he was Monica Lewinsky's attorney. She had more than one, but he was the one who loved the media. In fact, there's a term coined after him, the Phil Ginsburg. He was the first person to appear in all 5 major TV news shows. Obama did it, last year, promoting healthcare. It's called the Phil Ginsburg. That was my first wife, and she wanted to get on his sister. She wanted to get in with the tours. This is just a stop along the way. She wanted to get to museums and the big cities, and climbing scared me, but something attracted me about it. And I actually took a second. We had a lot of rainy days. We went down to Calanque, climbed in the sea cliffs on the Mediterranean, above Cassis. But I took a second 5-week course. They cost over $100. I felt guilty. That was a lot of money then, because we hadn't got that many days in due to bad weather. And but then it was kind of funny. She actually cut her own throat. One day I'm up in, Willens was a Cockney. He was out somewhere leading a climb and out of town. And I was in his room looking at his climbing books. And I said, God, this guy is very literate. I didn't know then that climbing meant a lot of downtime. And climbing, besides having a great literature, which I've always loved, including film, it means a lot of downtime, and it means a lot of reading. I was up in his room, and I'd heard about this guy, Leighton Core. He'd been putting up new routes above the village every day, and my wife came up, and she said, Leighton's looking for someone to climb with. She thought he wanted a partner from just above the village. Well, he knew I had a card. I bought a car for 1,000 kroner, Morris, Oxford, in Stockholm, $200. He wanted to go to the Dolomites. He had a list of climbs that to do, and he'd done some in spring, and now it was summer, and he wanted to go back. He wanted to ride. So Rhoda, that was her name, and myself in the front seat, Leighton and his French girlfriend, Marie Riviere France, thought that was an unusual name. Then in the back seat, a lot of giggling, I think having more fun than we in the front seat were having. And, he's trying to drag me up these routes way above my head in the Dolomites. And, with him it was more of an introduction to the way of life than climbing per se. We're going into, some cafe, and he's using the restroom to brush his teeth and shave, and shit, I've been doing that stuff ever since. I'm going to blame that on core. But we get back, and I decide with another student to do the Matterhorn, the easy route, the Hornby Ridge. It's really a workup, I mean, you could fall to your death. But, there's a deal that 4 Swiss guides actually tried pushing a cow to the top. They failed. I think there was some deaths. But, yeah, you get a cow on the top of the Matterhorn. But we asked if we could borrow a rope from Dougal, and we set off, and we got a late start. Various things happened. And the other guy, he quit on me. He said, I'm from New York, which I was actually from before moving to California when I was 3. And anyway, the result of all this was that I ended up soloing the route, never using the rope, I kind of thought when he quit that I'd tie in with someone, but everyone's heading down when I'm heading up, and the guides gave me a very rough time. And I was cautious and had my first voice bivvy on the way down. And anyway, I get back to Lausanne, and I tell my wife that I've climbed the Matterhorn. I've soloed the Matterhorn. After climbing a week in the Dolomites, it was easy, though there was verglass. I had an ice axe that was good for nothing on verglass. I didn't have crampons. I mean, it was pretty tricky when you cross onto the north face above the fixed rope. And so, I mean, it was figuratively, it was literally the highest I'd been in my life. I'd hiked up the top of Whitney. This is, a little higher. And figuratively, aside from some academic honors, and I was a pretty good wrestler, it was figuratively the highest I'd been. I've climbed by myself the Matterhorn, and she says, I'm leaving you. And I go from the highest I've been to the lowest in one sentence. And, I could joke about it now. It makes a good story, a good anecdote. But it was a bad period. She ended up, I was sleeping in the car. I had problems with the gendarmes, had bald tires. She's an au pair for the Rankins. And I actually left Europe, flew to Geneva on my own. She came back. We got back together, but, the writing was on the wall. And then 3 years later, Dougal shows up in Yosemite. He and Bev Clark, it was kind of like the deal is that Bev is paying for the trip and Dougal's his guide. And they're doing things in Yosemite. And they were going up to do Half Dome, doing the direct slab route, which has a dangerous section. People have actually died there. And Bev took a fall and got scraped up. Luckily not that badly. And Dougal comes over to my tent and he says, Bev's injured. We could do something really big, So great, he says, I have a few days. And so he wanted to do an El Cap route. He didn't want to do the nose because it had a British ascent, Mick Berg, who I'd also met. And just about all the people I met my first day of climbing in my life are gone, except Joy, who of course married Leighton and so on. And well, I'm not going to get into all that. So anyway, we start up, I wanted to think of something, and we start up the west buttress of El Cap, which had a bad reputation, flat cracks, mess up your knuckles hammering. 5 pitches up, we broke a haul bag. We broke a water bottle. We didn't have a tail rope. There was a pitch that went across, the bag swung across, broke the water bottle. We had one of those discussions, do we go up or down, which usually means you go down. So we went down, a couple of days in camp, and as a consolation prize, we ended up doing the 4th ascent of the South Face of Watkins, which was mentioned in the book that came out about Dougal. And, I always thought it'd be a great thing to make a living what you love doing. And after the climb, we were a day longer than expected. We went up to do originally, we had a bad night, attacked by mosquitoes, very hot, went back to Camp 4, we went back, it was a great climb. One pitch that really excited Dougal was this pitch where you lasso a root up above. He said, this is this is cowboys and Indians, this is American West. And so he had that lead. And on the way down, you're looking forward to one of the best parts about a big wall, just lying in a hammock and camp afterwards, drinking beer. Well, we're a day overdue, and we're halfway down the Snow Creek Trail, and there's Bev hiking up to meet us and saying, forget about, students are lined up waiting to, be guided and taught how to climb in Lausanne. You got to get back. So rather than the 2 days in camp, Dougal spends 2 days in a plane. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe it isn't the greatest thing to make a living at what you do, because after a while you won't do it. And even though you say climbing is the best of all activities, you may end up going sailing or some stuff like that on your days off. But the other thing that happened after that climb, Dougal said, "Do you want to work for me this summer?" That must have been spring. And I said, sure, as one of his guides. This is 69. And he said, the living, the wage in Europe is not the same as the States. And I said, I know that. So I went over, and I lived in his apartment. Davy Agnew had been his main guide the summer before. Now it was me and Mike Warburton and someone whose name I can't remember. I felt I actually we did most of the work. And it was quite a deal, because I'm next to his bedroom, and there was a pad, and I was never much of a drinker. I guess I'm not a real climber, especially like the Brits and Scots and so on. But I'd hear Dougal, he'd be at the bar at the Vag as late as he could, and then I'd hear Annie and he come home, and then a while later there was some commotion and a bit of a domestic tiff. Dougal had thrown up, and Annie was complaining, and I'd go back to bed. And then in the morning, Dougal would stagger into my room and say, I'm a bit out of it. Can you take them out today, the students? And I'd get to the Vagabond, and they'd been sitting there for a half hour on the steps of the Vagabond. And, and we'd hike up, and that was my memory of the formula of the way that summer went. So anyway, I knew I had a problem, but I was pretty shy. I think I overcompensate for it now. And at the end of the, 2 months of solid work, I finally brought the matter recompense. I'm leaving his compartment, staying in their apartment. He's buying my meals, my dinners at the Vag, which I think cost them around $1. The breakfast I was supposed to take there, only at the end of the summer, Annie says, I was feeling I was taking their food, and I didn't. And she says, Dave, you take so little. Davy Agnew ate so much. She said that at the very end of the summer. I mean, I have regrets, believe me. So I bring up the matter of money, and Dougal says, I realized he didn't want to pay me anything for the whole summer of work, and I don't have many students. And anyway, I think I got $150 out of it. And Dougal had amazing good qualities, but I saw a side I didn't like. Don, I have nothing but fond memories of. It was past his villain days. He was mellow. He's in a professional relationship with the students in '66, but in '69, it left a bad taste. But it was obliterated because my first marriage ended at the Club Vag, and I met my wife Betsy, and the mother of my children, Cheyenne and Teray, in '69. I won't lie to you. There was a certain symmetry to that I liked. But my first part of my life, the boring part ended there. Lost a wife, picked up a wife, been with me. We've been together ever since, over 30 years, and in the same place. And I'll tell you, this will be a cut, but I'll tell you a little Willen story. Don said that he was working on his autobiography that summer, and he had a choice of 2 titles. One was Villain, because that was his nickname for his pugnacious years. And everyone knows Willen's had an amazing sense of humor, but he could use it. He could be very cruel. The other potential title was Even Harder Years, because Willens and Brown were the famous climbing partnership, the best, toughest team on rock and mountains, but they'd had a falling out. So Brown's book was The Hard Years. So Don's is going to be Even Harder Years. Well, when the book came out, and it was mostly written by, a ghostwriter, but he's probably credited, it was Don Willen's Portrait of a Mountaineer. It was disappointing, and the great Willen stories were not in it. He couldn't do it about, himself. Tom Patey, the best story in Tom Patey's book, One Man's Mountains, is about short work with Willen's. Greg Child could do it, but not Don. But then, only a few years ago, the biography came out, Villain. But Don, I have nothing but good memories. He talked about doing an El Cap route with me, and this is going to be great because I'm the student, but now I'm an equal basis for this type of climbing, which, I'd done more than he, big wall climbs in Yosemite. And I'll never forget how I heard about his death. I was on the East End of Donald Lake, and Rob Schneider, who'd done things, he'd been on McKinley, I think, with Willens. The Schneider brothers, there were three of them, Steve became the superstar. He said Don died, age of 52, 53, heart attack, family history. That really hurt. All the things hurt when, Dougal died. He always seemed like he always had his worst incidents and lays on him. He's climbing steadily around the world. One day going down to the apartment, icy steps, leaving the bar and the vag, he broke his leg. And then, the ski accident. It seemed ironic, but gravity never sleeps and all that. Okay, I'll stop here. That's what I have, and it's way more than you can use unless it's a 5-hour film.
No, you only talked 16 minutes.
That was 16. You see, that's why sometimes when I overdo it, it never seems that long.
That was good. You stayed on track.
Yeah.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. How did you meet your second wife? What was she doing there?
Oh, okay.
That would be a good story for me.
You still running?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So what happened, I'm over there, and I'm guiding for Dougal, and Chris Jones, I get a call or whatever. It's funny, I was just thinking about this today for the first time. The French have this thing called the Rassemblement International. Please excuse my accent, I can't speak English well for some reason. And it's a deal where they invite each country to send 2 climbers to Chamonix and to the National School of Skiing and Climbing for 3 weeks. They pay everything. Give you food. If you're not up on the mountain, then you're staying free at the facility. You give them bivvy food. You got the telefreak, all the lifts free. And Chris, who is actually English, most Americans never heard of this, but he heard about it a great deal, free climbing holiday. And he was supposed to go over with, I think, Tom Bowman, who had some problem with his travel connections. He didn't get the reservation. And so Chris doesn't have a partner. He knew I was over there working for Dougal. And again, I was surprised that Dougal, I always thought Don was going to take over the school. But he asked if I could join him. So I go to Dougal. If I knew I was going to be stiffed at the end of the summer, believe me, I would have done the whole 3 weeks. But Dougal says, I could let you go for a week. So great. So I went over there and did the thing, did some great climbs. They had a kind of informal competition. They kept a list of what each, it wasn't supposed to be, but they kept a list of what each nationality did. And the easy winner was a guy I'd never heard about, this guy Messner, who'd just come back from an expedition in the Andes climbing Yurupaha. And he soloed the Dwats, the North Face, the hardest mixed climb in the Alps at the end. It had been climbed twice before, 2.5 days. He does it in 8 hours. And he easily won it. I hitchhiked back to Lausanne, and that was the night of the Americans on the Moon, which it's one of those things that I remember where I was when it happened. Like, like when JFK was killed and like 9/11. Those are the 3 things I remember. That night, it was prime time in the U.S., but it was 2 a.m. on a grainy TV. We're all watching in the VAG dining room. So I get this ride back. I was afraid I wasn't going to make a series of rides back to Lausanne. The last guy was drunk. I was lucky, made it up from Aigle. And anyway, Chris showed up back in Lausanne, and we're sitting at a table, and these 2 girls sitting opposite us. And they were doing, Betsy's parents were doing the summer. He was an entomologist, Port of Seattle. They're doing the summer staying in Holland. And Betsy and her girlfriend take off traveling around. But like all these people, they heard about the Club Vagabond. It wasn't a hostel, but savvy travelers heard about it. So they're sitting opposite us, Chris and I. And Betsy later said she thought it was Chris who was going to ask her out. And it's probably amazing that he didn't, because I was pretty slow as far as women. But that was how I met Betsy. And we hung out together and went back to the States together and got one of those deals, a car to be delivered in the West Coast. Broke down in the middle of New Mexico, suddenly a Buick. I mean, you could sleep in these cars, those big American models of the 50s and 60s. But that was how I met Betsy. She just heard about the club and the Vagabond and came through.
Did you, after that summer that you worked for Dougal, it was just that one summer, right?
Just yeah, I worked for Dougal one summer.
Did you ever go back and stay there?
Did I ever go back to the VAG? Not much. I met Larry. I met the Wares, Larry and Martine, and of course, in a way, he never left Liaison. He was there the first year of the school, the 1 year that Harlan was alive, that the school was in formation. So I went back a few. I don't even remember. I have to ask him how I met Larry, and we climbed in the States a few times, and I had a few trips to Europe, but I never really. I don't even think not even sure if I ever spent a night in the VAG. I know that Betsy and I must have been that summer after went to the Dolomites. A lot of it's getting mixed up, but I know we were in Liaison, and we poached in one of the sanatoriums, and I think it was the one for pediatrics where children died, and we were sleeping on a slab-like table that was only big enough for 1.5 people, with all these ghosts around. I think that was somewhere above the VAG, further up the road or something. I remember that night in Liaison. That one stands out. But never really had a lot to do, came through. Just, life moves on, a lot of interesting things happen. There's a lot of, I'm not one of those people who has no regrets. I have a lot of regrets. Sometimes I feel I lost a quarter century somewhere, that I was doing things. It's probably false memories. But never had a real, the year of the summer being a student there, and the summer of teaching, that was my main association with the VAG and Liaison.